Welcome back to another episode. Now I'm really glad that you're tuning in because today we have yet another exciting and a very interesting episode. Today we're going to look at something that we all know and use every single day, the internet. But we're going to be a little more specific. We're going to look at the early days of the internet. What was it like? What was it like to be one of the first people on the internet? How did people react? All that good stuff we're going to talk about in today's episode. If you're new here, I'm Cosden. This is Vlogs of Knowledge and it's absolutely crazy every single week. If you're not subscribed, I really think that you should be because we have a brand new episode every single week and it's absolutely crazy. So make sure to subscribe, make sure to hit the notification bell, join Team Knowledge and be notified whenever I release a new video. So with that being said, well, let's get to it. The internet is something that we all use every single day. It's become a central part in our lives. And quite frankly, at this point, I really don't think we'd be able to live without it. I mean, we use it to connect with people, to keep up with the recent news, to learn about things that we're interested in, and of course, to look at countless memes on the internet. What is it with people and memes these days on the internet? They're obsessed. Actually, I'm just kidding. I love memes. I'm one of those people. But if you really think about it, the internet is only about 30 years old. And in 30 years, we've come a long way. We have Facebook, we have Snapchat, we have Instagram, we have YouTube, we have Google. I mean, we have a lot of things. For 30 years, that's a lot. And as you can obviously imagine, there was a time where you had no Facebook, you had no YouTube, and you had no Google. The internet was raw, it was new, and people had no idea what to do with it. So for this week's episode, that's exactly what we're going to be talking about. The early days of the internet, what it was like, what people did, what kind of websites there were, how people reacted to it, and of course, the weird stuff. Because on the internet, there's always going to be weird stuff. But as always, before we continue, let's put all this in historical context and get some background. I'm not going to talk about the entire history of the internet because honestly, there's too much stuff to talk about. It deserves a whole video on its own. If you want to learn more about that, do some research on your own. There'll be some links in the description where you can start. But I still have to mention a few key points about the history of the internet. The internet began to be developed sometime around the 1950s or the 1960s. It was developed by scientists from the United States, the United Kingdom, and France. As time went on and as the computer technology evolved, sometime around the mid-1980s, people began to consider this idea of having a personal computer at home for their own personal use. Tech giants like Microsoft and Apple were all fighting for the privilege of whose computer gets to be in people's homes. This was a big battle. There was a lot of competition, and people that know Steve Jobs and that know Bill Gates know all about this competition and these big fights in the mid-1980s. As computers kept on getting more and more popular, the internet eventually catched on. In the early 1990s, we had the very first version of a modern internet, something that looked a lot like what we have today, but with a few key very fundamental differences. In the early 1990s, people were starting to hear about and get on the internet. It was something that was new, that was exciting, that was unfiltered, that was raw, that was kind of like the Wild West. It was really exciting. So now that we got the history out of the way, let's look at this internet and let's look at the early days of the internet and see what actually went on. First of all, to access the internet, you need to have an internet connection. You need to be able to connect to the internet, and for that you need a modem. More specifically, in the 1990s, you needed to have a 56K modem. The 56K modem is a modem that is a lot slower than a modem that you would have today, and also it ran through your telephone line, which meant that you could not be on the phone and at the internet at the same time. You had to make a choice. Either you call grandma and tell her you love her, or you do some bad stuff on the internet. That was for you to choose. Some of us are old enough to remember the strange but now nostalgic sounds that a 56K modem would make when trying to connect to the internet. Now, to connect to the internet, you need to have an internet service provider or an ISP, and at the time there weren't that many. There was one big one called AOL, America Online. After trying to connect to the internet, waiting for the weird buzzing sounds to finish, you would be hopefully redirected to perhaps one of the most well-known web pages of the 90s, AOL.com. Now keep in mind that this was way before Google, this was way before Yahoo, eBay, Amazon. The commercial presence on the internet just wasn't there, and as a result, you didn't see that many ads on web pages. The only ads that you would see were probably ads from AOL themselves. At your fingertips was a vast ocean of free, unfiltered, just raw information ready for you to explore. There were so many websites on so many subjects written by so many people with passions in different things, and of course the knowledge to turn those passions into an actual website. Many websites that were talking about the same thing were linked into something called a web ring, which is simply just a chain of websites. You had one main website, one administrator that would link all the other websites together with a common navigation bar, and if you click next at the top, you would be taken to the next website. It was actually a good way to discover new websites, something that we unfortunately don't have in today's web. Now, the internet wasn't just for information, it was also for connecting people together. You could connect people from around the world as long as they were connected to the internet very easy and very efficiently. You could then send email, pictures, videos, links, articles, pretty much anything that you could put on a computer, you could send via an email. Those days saw the rise of the very first email clients with the iconic "You've Got Mail" message that would play every single time you got a new mail. And it's actually ironic because back then people were more excited for email than they were for actual mail. And today it's the opposite. We're more excited for actual mail than we are for email. Besides email, you also had a lot of online chat rooms, and these were really popular. Like, all you needed was a username, you just had to connect to a chat room, and you could talk with anybody. You were completely anonymous. You could join any chat room anywhere in the world, talking about any subject that you wanted, and just start chatting with strangers from around the world. Like, this was very huge in the early days of the internet. That's what a lot of people did. People use something called IRC, which stands for Internet Relay Chat, to connect to these chat rooms and talk online. Simply put, it's like a very bare bones, very early version of something like Facebook Messenger. You would just download the software, find a chat room, make a username, be completely anonymous, and just start chatting. Now, of course, you can imagine that when people's identity is protected behind a computer screen, they're gonna lie about who they are on the internet. It's inevitable. We still have it today. In fact, the most common question in these online chat rooms was something called ASL, which stands for age, sex, and location. People would ask that question all the time because it was the only way to sort of know who you were talking to. The most common answer was 18, female, and California, because on the internet, everybody is an 18-year-old girl from California. And you as a user, well, how would you know if this is a lie or if this isn't a lie? Like, there was no way that you could know. The internet gave people the power to be whoever they wanted to be without any sort of consequence. Like, there was no way that people could know if you're lying or not. Like, you could be whoever you wanted to be, and this was something that was never possible before. And taking this whole concept of being who you wanted to be, creating your adventure, lying about who you were, and just doing stuff on the internet that you couldn't really do in real life, people started to play a lot of online games. They would join up with people from around the world, get items, hunt dungeons, kill monsters, and this was all text-based because at the time, computers weren't really able that much to process graphic-intensive games. Like, of course, you had games on computers, but a lot of these games were also text. Like, instead of actually seeing your character, you would see text, right? You've killed this monster, you've gained this level, you've gained this item. Like, this was a different way to play games, but nonetheless, it was still engaging because you lived out an entirely different life, except that it was by text. Now, besides games, you also had the rise of file sharing, and more specifically, peer-to-peer file sharing. Now, simply put, what is file sharing? Basically, let's say that I have a file on my computer and I want you to download it. I can allow you to just download straight from my computer and not have to go through a website. That's exactly the way that torrents work. You then had the rapid growth and also the rapid death of many peer-to-peer file sharing services like LimeWire, Kazaa, Napster, and so on. And I mean, these were great, except for the fact that you couldn't really know if the file that you were downloading was actually what the title says. Like, sometimes you might get the new Eminem song, other times you might get something that really should not be on your computer. There was no central authority on the internet. Nobody was really regulating nor influencing the internet in any single way. It was really pure, it was really raw, it was really like the Wild West. Like, this whole new world had just opened up to people for the very first time, and people were excited. They wanted to know what was possible, what you could do with the internet. And this can be seen by the rapid increase in people and websites on the internet in the 1990s. Like, we went from 50 websites in 1992 to over 10 million websites in 1999. That's a huge increase. But this was also influenced by the fact that Google, Amazon, eBay, and other big companies all jumped on the internet because they saw a big opportunity. And when you have such big companies going on the internet, you're going to attract people to go on the internet. In fact, I do have a video on the dot-com bubble that really explains what happened, how it happened, and the impact of the dot-com bubble. And it's sort of what happens next after the early days of the internet, right? Like, the early days of the internet are what happened before the dot-com bubble, and the dot-com bubble is what happens right after. And when the dot-com bubble burst in 2001, that's usually when we classify the end of the early days of the internet and the beginning of this new phase of the internet called Web 2.0. The early days of the internet didn't really last too long, and I'm kind of sad because I was born in 1993, and by the time that I got on the internet, it was like 2000 or 2001, like the dot-com bubble was already bursting, and Web 2.0 was just around the corner. But still, it was a great time nonetheless. I really hope that you've enjoyed this video on the early days of the internet, and if you did, please leave it a big thumbs up, make sure to subscribe, make sure to hit the notification bell, join Team Knowledge, and be notified whenever I release a new video. And now it's time for questions. When did you first get on the internet? What was your first experience on the internet like? Please do leave me a comment. I would love to read and answer them all, and bonus points for you if you do leave a comment. You might get featured next week's video as a fan of the week. So it's a win-win for everybody. As you know, and as I say in the end of every video, I haven't talked about everything, and the things that I did talk about, I haven't gone into too much detail. That's okay. I'm actually doing this on purpose because I want you guys to go out and research more on your own. And in fact, if you do want to research, there's some links in the description where you can start. So that being said, my name has been Cosden. It's been an absolute pleasure. You can follow me on social media. The links will be in the description, and I'll see you all next week.